this standard ISO 21434 and its impact on the industry. And I can imagine that a lot of people are currently thinking about how will it affect their work. So what is the scope of the standard?
Very good question. The scope of the standard comes from your corporate level security strategy, risk management, then your product development strategies, product development processes, the V model, how you will do what kind of security activities is required at which stage of the V model, then all the way to security lifecycle management. You ship your product, then you have to manage the product, incidents management and all those, all the way to that. So the scope is pretty broad. It even goes to an organizational security cultural level. Security culture is very important, security policy. So this is the scope. Now, you mentioned a really interesting part in your question, that how is it going to impact or affect people? I think the good thing about the standard is it goes really, really harmoniously with ISO 26262. And it is also written in a way that it is not something that you will require drastic changes. It is not going to create any panic when the standard is out there. What is required is clever process engineering for the companies. For my clients who are coming to me today and asking, hey, this ISO 21434 is coming up, what should we do? What I do is I look at their existing standard and do a gap analysis, and often, very often than you think, there is a huge gap in their existing process with the current standard that's out there. Oftentimes the gap is at the quality level. So you have to build the ASPICE quality. That's your foundation. If you want to put safety, ISO 26262 or ISO 21434, even SODIM on top, you have to build it on top of ASPICE, the quality. QM stands for quality, and that is where I think most of my clients are struggling. So if you have a good process that reflects your reality and the foundation is strong, the ASPICE compliance is strong, and you have experience with ISO 26262, I think rolling out ISO 21434 will not that be challenging. Of course, there are some frictions that you have to consider. For example, there can be security goals that will have impact on your safety goals. Timing is one such issue. Safety requires sometimes milliseconds for a certain function to be executed. Security requires more computation time because of crypto. So such things will have to be taken into consideration. If you have a good foundation, I don't think there is much to worry about.
So one thing that the ISO 21434 standard addresses is the goal of establishing a common terminology, let's put it like that, in the industry. And for that purpose, the standard mentions several terms, and maybe not all people will be familiar with it. So for example, there's the definition of an asset. So what is an asset as per the new standard?
In security domain, asset is a well-defined term. This is a very important question that you just asked, because often what I see is we use a terminology, but we do not have, even in a boardroom, we do not have consistent definition in our head when we talk about it. In security, an asset is something that you want to protect. Anything you want to protect is an asset. Something that might not have any value to you, but to the person or to the entity that you're trying to defend to have certain value. Or the attacker have got certain value of that is an asset. To translate it into the context of automotive, let's think about a scenario that you're sending a CAN message, a controlled area network message, a packet assembled over CAN to your powertrain ECU. So that is an asset that you want to protect. And there are certain properties, cybersecurity properties we call, that you want to ensure. Very basic cybersecurity properties are the CIA of security, confidentiality, integrity, and authenticity. In case of this CAN message that we're talking about, when you want to send it to your powertrain ECU, I have to ensure two cybersecurity properties. One is the integrity. If someone can tamper it, I have a problem, because then my vehicle's speed can go out of control. The second is authenticity. I want to know from where this message is sent. If the message is sent by the person who is meant to send this message. or an entity in this case, or another ECU probably. Confidentiality, do I really care about this in this particular scenario? I don't think so. We don't really keep this signal confidential. So this is how an asset is defined, and the cybersecurity properties related to this asset should be defined according to the standard. Yeah.
What about threats? Can you tell us a little bit more about threats as per the new standard?
Absolutely. So the standard suggests threat analysis. In the risk management part of the standard, they're talking about threat analysis. You have to identify the threats. The threats are the potential for attacks. And we have several approaches out there that are commonly practiced. One of them in automotive that is heavily practiced is the STRIDE method. S stands for spoofing. If you can spoof your CAN message or not. So this will be one of your threat. And if you can identify that, okay, this is possible, then you will sort of draw an attack path based on these threat. It can be done top down. It can also be bottom up. If it is top down, you start from the threat and go all the way down to your asset. If it is bottom up, you start from your asset, you identify what can go wrong, and you go up to the threat.
In the standard ISO 21434, there are several methodologies, I would call it, mentioned concerning how to perform risk assessment, risk analysis. And one method that is mentioned is Tarah. So how is Tarah performed?
Very good question. So Tarah is threat and risk analysis, which is, again, a parallel of HARA that we do in ISO 26262, hazard and risk analysis. The objective of Tarah is to identify the threats, identify the risk associated with it in order to make a decision. This is the objective of Tarah. How do you do that? You start with the threats. You identify, this is the top-down approach I'm talking about. Of course, there can be bottom-up. The top-down approach is starting from the threats. So here is one well-established and practiced widely one approach is called the STRIDE method. The acronym stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation. I stands for information disclosure. D stands for denial of services. E stands for elevation of privileges. Now, all these attacks are, of course, theoretical. Your job in the Tarah is to find real attacks in your context based on these, and then identify the damages, identify the assets and the damages of the assets. And what you do is you build an attack tree. Each path of the attack tree that goes from the top to the bottom is a potential attack path. And here you perform an analysis to find out what is the cost of each path in your tree. As a result of that, you come up with numbers that tells you your risks, the impacts of the risks, so that you can come up with risk mitigation measures.
So you said that the ISO 21434 standard mentions 4 different types of damages. Can you give an example of each type?
The standard talks about 4 types of damages. The first is financial damage. So obviously someone can steal your credit card information from your car. That is a financial damage. Someone can steal your car. That's the financial damage. The second type of damage is privacy. Someone can steal your data. That is privacy damage. So GDPR makes it really interesting, the way GDPR defines personal data. So anything that can be related to a person is personal data. So any data in your car can be personal data. Personal identifiable data is a little bit narrowed down, where you can triangulate a person based on their data that you'll be collecting. So that's why privacy implication is also very important. Then you have safety impact of the damages. This is, in my opinion, very crucial. Safety and security have to work hand in hand. This is where we're talking about human lives or injury. And finally, we have operational damages. You can just cripple a car by attacking. So these are the 4 kinds of damages.
So can you tell us a bit more about those scenarios for damages?
Absolutely. So, like we just talked about threats. Yeah, threats can have impacts, and damages are the impact that we're worried about. Damages with regard to the assets we have identified. Let's stick to the CAN message scenario for now. So again, just to recap, we want to send a CAN message to our powertrain ECU. Nicely assembled CAN packets, we're sending over the controlled area network. What we want to ensure is the damage at a certain level. So the damage at the asset level that we have just identified, if our asset is the CAN message itself, the damage is anything that happens to the CAN message. If it can be tempered, it can be spoofed, if it can be anything that would happen which is intended for this asset is a damage. Now, when we identify damages for certain assets, we have to also look at the impacts of the damage. There can be 4 kinds of impact in automotive due to a damage based on a threat. A threat and damage, they're always related. A damage is an aftermath of a threat. So there is a relation. One threat can have several damages, and a damage can be caused by several threats. Now, what is the impact of a damage? The impact can be financial. The impact can be operational. The impact can be safety. The impact can be privacy. We identify the asset, we identify based on a threat, what damage can be happening, and what are the impacts. And based on that, we make our decision.